Hello, Tortured here. Today, I'm making a video on CO matchups. Now, CO matchups are a little bit different from looking at the COs individually, since you want to understand what your CO wants to accomplish against the opponent CO, and that can differ from CO to CO. Today, I wanted to look at a matchup that is pretty simple to understand. It's Andy versus Drake, and there are many different ways that people look at this matchup, but I want to sort of go into what the different styles of playing this matchup are and which one is sort of the best one to go with, and then sort of show some examples of how effective that style can be. So let's start by looking at the COs in question. So looking at this matchup, Andy versus Drake, this is a matchup where both COs have a sort of late game playstyle they can play for. Uh, Specifically in Andy versus Drake, though, Drake has a pretty tough time because his superpower is a mass damage superpower, and Andy's is a mass healing. So if Drake uses his power first, then Andy can just repair up all the damage. So Drake would prefer if Andy used his powers on a turn where then he can superpower right after and sort of get that 2 damage to stick and really press a lead with that. However, that's all in Andy's court. Andy would love to set up times where Drake can Typhoon and use his superpower, and he can just hyper repair that or hyper upgrade and pretty much reverse all the effects of Drake's superpower for a cheaper cost as well. Drake likes to stall out games to late game and try to kill off as many of units as Andy's as he can once he's sort of set up enough sort of massive firepower, while Andy can also do kind of a similar thing where he builds up the heavy units like the Neo tanks, medium tanks, things that Drake can't kill instantly, and then he can use hyper upgrade to bring them back to life over and over and over again and overwhelm Drake. However, I think that's probably one of the more common ways to play it, is to sort of have a stall fest where one person has Typhoon ready, one person has hyper upgrade ready, and you're both kind of waiting for who uses it first. However, to really break this matchup open, you got to trade aggressively early on and utilize your power. Your power is your strongest weapon against Drake. Because if you're in a situation where Drake uses a superpower and you use your normal power, you're reverting most of the lasting damage of Typhoon. And you're even getting in more activations of your power, which gives you 10% attack, 10% defense, and you'll be able to get earlier power spikes. Even though your hyper repair is only 2 HP, it oftentimes brings alive a lot of your slightly weakened units, your 8 HP tanks that have first struck, brings to life a little bit of more of the copters that maybe took 1 HP damage from infantry or hit another copter and took a little bit of retaliation, brings them right back to max capacity. And that can be really strong in early skirmishes. To even get that little bit of HP can break open those brawls and make Drake in a situation where he cannot get to a Typhoon and then be able to set up for a turn where you can't heal. Using powers early means that Drake either has to use his normal power right after you use your normal power in order to ensure that at least some damage is sticking, or he can opt for saving up for a Typhoon, which also adds in the rain, but makes it so that Andy is for sure going to be able to heal the next turn, since on a Typhoon turn, you need to deal damage in order to win as Drake. And the side effect of dealing damage is you're giving power charge if someone has not used a power. That's oftentimes why if you use this aggressive power spam with Andy, you'll get a lot of normal powers out of Drake, because he understands that a good player is going to understand that they cannot save up for a Typhoon because they need to be dealing damage to Andy during the times where he can't build charge up. And so using your normal power becomes really the only option for Drake, and that makes him a lot weaker as a CO. So I want to go into some games on different maps and show how styles where it's a little bit more of a stally style, how to play that with Andy versus Drake using this power spam strategy, or if it's a more open brawly map, how to really abuse the power spam early and often to getting in advantageous states. So let's get into the first match. So this is a match between MathBlitz and Rice Muncher on the map 1v1 Feshu. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but this was a map that used to be in the Global League. This is sort of an older match that I pulled out, but it's sort of hard to find Drake versus Andy, since most people try to avoid playing Drake because of this matchup. But this is a match that is kind of a more stally match to look at. So, in this situation, Andy is slightly ahead in terms of unit caps, unit value. He's been able to just like sort of play a little bit better. There's a little bit of a lead for Andy, but this is where you're sort of saving up for powers. So MathBlitz is basically ready for a super. He's 1,000 away from super, and Rice Muncher on Drake is about 10,000 away from a super. So MathBlitz, does some moves, and then it's hyper repair. So uses the power, and this is important to note because a lot of time people would go for a hyper upgrade in this situation, and that is just the incorrect move. If you're going to move first as Andy, and you're in a situation where both of you have built up power, you should either use your power or you should just not use your power at all and try to go in, because you always want to have a heal ready right after Drake has his power so that you can reverse the damage instantly and not have the lasting effects of Typhoon hit you. So MathBlitz opts in this situation to go for power. It's a little bit questionable because he probably could have hit a couple units first to take some damage and then heal it back up. So some of these infantry hits on over here, probably some other hits as well could have been done before using the power. But using the power first lets you do a little bit extra damage. You get the 10% firepower. So I can understand it. I just might have done something differently in this position. So you can see he goes in for a sort of an aggressive wall break. It doesn't do a ton, but he's breaking through. The most critical thing was that he was able to get to this artillery, which probably didn't even need a power for, but that sort of makes this medium tank pretty durable and unkillable in this formation, which is one of Andy's strengths, is having those large, bulky units. So moves up all these units and gets them in position for a nice wall. So you want to have good walling when you're playing against Drake. You don't want him to be able to break your wall easily or have like a nice front. So in this situation, if Rice Muncher had more of these units sort of that could be mobile, he could have sort of supplied this strong side and tried to utilize his superpower on a turn where he could wall break, but he just doesn't have the forces over here. He's got a weak copter, and then he's got 4 tanks and an anti-air, which is not nearly going to be enough, as we're going to see. So MathBlitz is very focused onto this side. He's got medium tank, bunch of tanks, he's got artillery support, he's got mechs, copters, anti-air. He's set. He's got everything in position, and he has a super weak side with just an artillery and a mech and a couple of infantry. So this is one point to mention here. But when Drake uses Typhoon, you can see that everything goes down to 8, power of global damage. But because of MathBlitz's walls and the fact, so if we go back here for a second, see this is like a 2 HP tank, and for most COs, if you saw this, you'd be like, I'm not wasting my full HP tank on hitting this 2 HP tank. But this is kind of a forced thing you have to do against Andy, is you have to kill off those really weakened units. And utilizing that, it makes it so that Drake is kind of forced to use his vehicles in ways that are kind of suboptimal for fully realizing their firepower. So this counterattack really gets very little. It wasn't like MathBlitz's attack originally did a ton of damage, but it did enough to sort of wall break him and break open the game and not let Drake stall out. So now MathBlitz's turn. He's a little bit behind in terms of value, but that's just because of the tsunami lasting damage, so he's able to get a couple hits in. He's trying to build up that power gauge so he can get another power. Because if you use your power at the max value, you're going to lose a little bit of extra power, so you're going to need about, probably about like 6,000, 7,000 worth of damages. So Math Blitz tries to find those, and then he can get a hyper repair. And look at that, like 24,000 worth of value with this normal power from Andy. And so basically completely reverses all the damage that Drake did. This is what makes this almost unwinnable for Drake in most situations, because Andy is just going to come in, he's going to repair off everything, and then your main trump card is just completely wiped out. And there's pretty much nothing you can do to counter it. So, moves up. See that it's just kind of hard at this point. Math Blitz is up quite a bit. He's got a power going, so he's got extra defense. So any of these sort of counterattacks are not going to do much. Got a couple more hits, and I'm just going to sort of skip through, fast forward this, show that, eventually this just becomes kind of too overwhelming for Drake. You can see the economy just starts going downhill pretty fast after this point. Once you can sort of snowball this advantage, it becomes hard to play this as Drake. So now at this point, Math Blitz is double the value. Drake has a Typhoon ready, but is it gonna matter? Or we know the story. If you Typhoon, Andy hyper repairs, and your Typhoon is undone. So at this point, Ragementor resigns. So that's an example that shows sort of a more stalled out scenario and how to use the powers back to back in order to get an advantage and then sort of undo a lot of the damage that Drake did during his turn. So I'm going to go to another replay and show a more aggressive style of using Andy's power. So this is a match between myself and MX DCY W2000 on the map Dragons in the Dark. Now, Dragons in the Dark is a lot more open than 1v1 Fei Shui. There's a bottom left front, a center front, and a top right front that are all sort of able to be freely front switched into, and there's a lot of open terrain and not many choke points, so it's pretty easy to get very messy brawls early on this map, which I think makes the Andy versus Drake matchup a lot easier. And I'm going to show how I utilized this to really find the aggression, and then once I'm trapped in a brawl, to utilize my powers early to get a monumental lead that Drake cannot come back from. So early on, do some capping, try to get the properties. I had capped this sort of center property earlier in the game very quickly so that it becomes this center point for a potential brawl that I can start out. Because if Drake wants to capture these two center properties, he's probably going to have to take a fight with me. So I can start exerting some pressure for two reasons down here. First is I've seen these tanks that are over here, so I know that they're in range if they want to start fighting me, but I'm pretty sure that he can't have like more than at least two tanks in this area. So if he starts a brawl, I'll be able to win it. And I want him to start trying to fight me in the Andy matchup. But this gets me a lot of pressure on this front without really having to sacrifice anything. So just sort of a basic, trying to find the pressure and trying to get Drake to fight me before he can start building up. So this recon in the top side is exerting some pressure, so that'll naturally make him try to create a strong side near where he has to move his tank up to help kill the recon, since you want to try and gather your units together. So that's exactly what happens. Moves this infantry to start this cap, moves these recon and tanks over to this right front, and this is the turn where he's sort of, in his front switch, he's sort of left his tanks exposed. Got these two tanks that are exposed, and I can start a brawl that will be favorable for him. So cap these properties, move this recon away to safety, and then I can start my fight. So when you attack, pin, full HP to full HP, I take 2 damage in retaliation, which is great because that is the threshold you want to find when you're Andy versus Drake, because you want to be able to set up for hyper repairs. So take 2 of those, kill off a tank. Now I have like 3 tanks to 1 in this immediate area, and I can start reinforcing all my tanks over to this area to cover for each other. So this situation I've created is basically lose-lose at this point regardless of what you do. Even if there were more tanks in this area, like if we put a tank over here on the silo, this was a normal, these were like 2 normal tanks and they could reinforce quickly. This anti-air was a tank. It would still just not be enough, because one of the downsides to fighting against Andy is you are forced to kill off his units completely. What I did, where I hit this tank to 4 HP, the Drake player cannot do that against me. He has to make sure that every time he attacks something, he's killing it or bringing it down to a point where it's not really going to impact the fight. So Drake's turn. He decides, okay, I mean, if I run away from losing essentially almost 2 full tanks, I've lost the game already. So he's forced into this brawl, kills off a tank, tries to hold this point with a recon, gets another good shot onto this tank, but doesn't kill it. Anti-air can kill off an infantry there. Builds up some more medium tanks trying to counter the tanks, but this is where you want to immediately go for the jugular and use your power to get the most out of a brawl early on in the game. So I move in here, get some hits to weaken up these units. Try to find the kills to get as much power as you can. When you're using power COs, you want to try and take engagements before you use your power that your power wouldn't affect it anyway. So this infantry kill here, it does not require power. This anti-air kill here doesn't require power. It's 100% chance to kill regardless. Then I can, once I'm done with all the moves that don't require that power, then I can use my power. I bring to life all these units that were weakened, even just a little bit slightly. This enables a 6 HP tank to kill this 3 HP one, which opens up a pathway for some more attacks. I can hit this tank into here, getting an amazing engagement here. This opens up the pathway for that injured tank that was 8 HP. Full HP, come in, hit this anti-air. I can enable that copter to then hit as well. Since it's a weakened anti-air, if it gets a first strike, it won't really take too much damage in retaliation. And then I can start building up more units to continue the pressure on this front. And at this point, there's literally no counterplay. It doesn't matter if Drake wants to use a power. There's nothing he's going to find here with any damage he can use. And even in a theoretical situation where we see a different build besides a medium tank, if this was 2 tanks and we had 2 more tanks reinforcing, they're just getting stuck in an infinite brawl where they're going to not be able to finish off Andy's units. Andy can keep plugging in new tanks and new copters, and the brawl will always go in Andy's favor in this situation. So Drake resigns at this point. It's a very quick game, but it shows how you can use Andy's power to go for the jugular early, and then even if Drake has some counterplay, you're not going to be getting him into Typhoon range immediately after your attack, so you'll have a chance to recover some power charge on his Typhoon turn when you take a lot of damage. So those are 2 examples of games, one with the more stally side, this one was a way more aggressive style of using the power, and these are sort of the ways you should think about playing the Andy matchup. You shouldn't be trying to save up for superpower and then trading that with Drake, because either that'll, if you use it first, Drake will have lasting sticking damage onto you with his superpower, and if you use it second, you're just giving Drake a much better chance of being even and using a Typhoon to break your lines enough that he can actually come back even if you use a power to undo most of the other side effect damage. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I intend to make a couple more of these types of videos, looking at different CO matchups, probably some replay commentaries as well in the future. But until then, have a great day. Bye.